"Don't let that man come near me," Elena begged when she saw the doctor in charge of her delivery. Her life and that of her baby were in the hands of a man she despised at a crucial moment in her pregnancy. If you are passionate about true stories, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories. Eleanor was approaching the last month of her pregnancy. In a few weeks, she would embrace her long-awaited baby. Her husband Marco, always attentive and caring, suggested spending an unforgettable weekend in a charming guest house in a small town. That town had a special place in Elena's heart. It was the place of her childhood summer vacations. Her grandparents had lived there all their lives, but after her grandmother's death, Elena had never returned. Marco thought that the escape was the perfect opportunity to enjoy moments of intimacy before the baby arrives. Despite the good memories, Elena was hesitant, remembering a turbulent past. Eleanor, exhausted by the preparations of the last few months, wanted some respite and time with her husband. A romantic weekend was just what she needed to relieve tension. It was a quiet Saturday, and the couple's car glided gently along the road, flanked by the sea. As the landscape passed, Eleanor's memories began to resurface, but they also carried the shadow of a recent episode that troubled her. As they approached the city, Elena could see the roofs of the houses in the distance. The old wooden bridge over the river, the only entrance to the city, appeared before them. Elena asked Marco to stop at the cemetery to leave some flowers on her grandmother's grave. Marco agreed, and once they arrived, Eleanor slowly walked among the graves until she found her grandmother's. She hadn't been there since the funeral more than 5 years ago. Now, standing in front of the grave, she could finally pay her respects. After a while, the couple headed to the inn, a charming place that promised to be the perfect setting for their special weekend. The day was filled with walking through the charming streets of the city and tasting local dishes. The weather was ideal, with a mild sun that invited serenity. As the day drew to a close, a light rain began to fall, accompanying the evening with the soothing sound of drops hitting the window. The melody of the rain seemed to compose a lullaby, but no one could predict that this peaceful melody was about to turn into a dramatic event. As the night progressed, the rain intensified, quickly turning into a thunderstorm. Loud thunder and lightning woke Eleanor and Marco, who had been sleeping until then. The sound of the storm was accompanied by hurried and alarmed footsteps in the corridors of the inn, creating an atmosphere of urgency. Marco, moved by an instinct of protection, stood up and opened the door of the room. The hallway was bustling with guests, dragging suitcases and talking in anxious tones. An employee explained that the river was rising rapidly and threatened to flood, threatening the only bridge into the city. Eleanor, listening to the explanation, began to feel visibly ill. Her breathing became heavy and irregular. It was then that an even more alarming news echoed among the guests. The bridge had been submerged by the force of the waters. Realizing the gravity of the situation and the need for immediate medical attention for Eleanor and the baby, Marco made the decision to brave the storm and take her to the only available hospital in the city. As they raced against time, anxiety and nervousness increased, and Elena ended up fainting along the way. When they arrived at the hospital, the scene was desolate. The place seemed abandoned. Marco, carrying Elena in his arms, ran inside, calling for help. A nurse brought a stretcher and helped to ease Eleanor onto it. The hospital was practically empty, with only the nurse and one other doctor left. At that moment, Dr. Rossi appeared with a serious but calm expression and immediately began to examine Eleanor, who was still unconscious. "Your wife is in labor," the doctor announced, further surprising Marco. What was already an emergency situation was now turning into an even more critical scenario, with Eleanor going into premature labor, probably precipitated by the stress and tension of the day. Eleanor struggled to regain consciousness while her body was still in the fog of fainting. When she opened her eyes, she found herself facing Dr. Rossi's face, and instantly a whirlwind of memories hit her like a punch. Her muscles tensed, and a strangled cry escaped her lips. She remembered that the doctor, on a past occasion, had failed to save her grandmother during a medical crisis because he was drunk. Before continuing, we ask you to like to support our work. Thank you very much. Despite all the resentment boiling inside her, Eleanor knew that her life and that of her son were now in the hands of that doctor. Dr. Rossi, with all his experience, began the procedures for the birth, coordinating with the nurse. In a few minutes, the baby was born. A tense moment hung in the air when the baby didn't cry right away. But the doctor acted quickly, sucking out the amniotic fluid the baby had swallowed during delivery. Soon, the newborn's vigorous cry resounded through the room, bringing palpable relief to everyone present. For Eleanor, the doctor who in her mind was the very embodiment of death, was now offering her a new beginning in life. The one she blamed for the loss of her grandmother had become the instrument of life, guiding her through the birthing process. As the storm raged mercilessly outside, a moment of calm and serenity settled in Elena's heart. Eleanor, in her hospital bed, wrapped in the quiet of postpartum, listened to the comforting words of her husband. Marco told her that Dr. Rossi had voluntarily remained in the city to help anyone who needed it, demonstrating his dedication and altruism. When the doctor came to check if everything was okay with her and the baby, Elena felt it was time to free herself from the burden she had been carrying for over 5 years. This time, looking at the doctor's face, she no longer felt the same anger as before. Instead, the doctor's serene appearance now gave her a sense of calm. She thanked Dr. Rossi for what he had done and apologized for blaming him for her grandmother's death. And so, in the turmoil of a storm, Eleanor found peace at the hands of the one she had seen as the cause of death. She welcomed life, reminding us that sometimes we are so immersed in our own pain and loss that we look for villains where none exist. It is easy to assign blame and responsibility to someone, especially when we are dealing with the weight of grief. However, in doing so, we can lose sight of the complexity of life and the unpredictable nature of events. There is not always a clear villain to blame. Sometimes, it is just the unfathomable course of life that brings us challenges and tragedies. Recognizing this allows us to cultivate greater understanding and compassion for others and ourselves, and enables us to find peace and acceptance in the midst of adversity.